pessoas foram abduzidas por extraterrestres. Contatos desses seres com crianças em escolas em todo o mundo. Amizade com ser extraterrestre é possível? Vem comigo, que o entrevistado de hoje vai falar sobre tudo isso e muito mais. Bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite, boa madrugada, aonde você estiver. Eu sou o THIAGO Luiz TICCHETTI. Sejam bem-vindos ao canal Desvendando Mistérios. Olá pessoal, e o nosso convidado de hoje, nosso entrevistado no canal, foi uma entrevista que eu fiz lá em 2021 e é inédita no canal. Ele é Preston Dennett, um dos maiores ufólogos norte-americanos, autor de mais de 20 livros, dentre os quais Encontros com extraterrestres em Escolas. Temos também relatos de pessoas que foram abduzidas por extraterrestres e casos de avistamentos de OVNIs enquanto a pessoa estava num drive-in. São dezenas de livros dos mais variados temas ufológicos. Ele vai contar pra gente aqui muitos desses casos, alguns curiosos, que tenho certeza que você nunca ouviu falar. Então vem comigo em mais essa entrevista inédita e, como sempre, exclusiva, que você só encontra aqui no canal Desvendando Mistérios. Mas além dessa entrevista no canal, que é inédita e exclusiva, você tem muitas outras entrevistas, são quase 50 entrevistas aqui no canal. E para sempre que tiver um vídeo novo, você ser avisado, não se esqueça, tem que se inscrever primeiro, depois marque o sininho. Dê também a sua curtida, curta todos os mais de 400 vídeos no canal. E deixe também o seu comentário em todos os vídeos. Eu quero saber a sua opinião, faça uma pergunta. Eu terei o maior prazer em respondê-la. Vamos então para essa entrevista com o ufólogo Preston Dennett. Muita coisa que ele vai falar aqui, tenho certeza, você nunca ouviu antes. Well, Preston, thank you very much for being here and accept my invitation. We tried several times, but always I have some trouble to connect with you. But thank you very much to be here in my YouTube channel.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, my friend, many people in Brazil don't know about you, but after this interview, I think they're gonna know you much more, and they're gonna look for your work, because as I showed you before, I have some of your books, 4 books. I have these 2 books, not from here, and volume 1 and 2, and we will talk about it. I have the healing power of the UFOs. And it's a very, very interesting subject. And schoolyard UFO encounters. Yes. I made a video in my YouTube channel about the UFO encounters in schools, and people love it. And I saw it that you have one case here in Brazil with Antonio Faleiro. Antonio Faleiro is my friend. He's a ufologist as well, but it was in 1952. But there's no much information, as you wrote. Well, many of the accounts report there's no much information, but we will discuss about it. Well, my friend, so you are the guest. I will let you talk, and I will start with the first question. It's the same question that I make for everybody. Well, how did your interest in ufology start?
Yeah, it was kind of by accident, actually. I was not looking for it. I actually did not believe in UFOs. I was very skeptical and had no interest in the subject really at all. I did not believe in it. But then a strange thing happened. I was just watching the news on TV, on television, and there was a story about a sighting over Alaska. And a Japanese commercial airliner pilot, Captain Kenju Toroshi, described how 2 very large UFOs tracked his plane for several miles. And it's quite a well-known case in the field. It was on radar. There were additional witnesses. But the news report was very short. They just kind of laughed nervously about it and moved on. But it intrigued me. And I remember my brother said he had seen a UFO, and I didn't believe him at the time. This was some years earlier. And so I asked him, I'm like, Mark, my older brother, what did you see? And he described this really amazing UFO encounter where he chased a UFO in the car with his friends. It was very low, treetop level, a metallic disc with colored lights on it, a dome, totally silent. And he chased it for about 15 or 20 minutes. And I'm like, wow, I was impressed. And that sort of started my interest. I started asking other people in my family, found out I actually knew quite a few people who had seen UFOs, people in my family, friends, people I worked with, and some had actually seen ETs face to face or been taken on board. So that is how I got interested.
Well, I just can't imagine chasing a UFO. It's at the same time, it's it's cool, but at the same time it's dangerous because you don't know what's gonna happen. So, well, your brother was very very brave man because I don't think I'm gonna chase a UFO, but who knows? Who knows?
Yeah, he was a teenager at the time, so.
When we are teenager, we do everything. We are invulnerable. We are Superman.
Exactly.
Well, President, you are the author of 22 books of ufology. You have more. You have about the Bigfoot stuff, but ufology 22 books, if I'm not wrong. And many of these books are about UFOs over some states like New York, New Mexico, California, Nevada, and even close encounter of drive-ins. That's amazing.
Yeah.
It's an amazing subject. But have you been able to identify if there is something in common in the cases that occurred in these states, like shape, like type of report, sighting, something like that?
To a certain extent, I think UFOs come in all different shapes. It's quite frustrating, actually, because we have saucer shapes, V-shaped craft, circular globes, spheres, manta ray shaped, cigar shaped. So those are the shapes that turn up most often, and they seem to be pretty much universal wherever, whichever state. Each state does seem to have some unique qualities to it. They definitely, UFOs do seem to be attracted to certain areas, anything that's technological, such as a nuclear power station or an Air Force base, prisons. I found that quite fascinating. So there are definitely some things that UFOs seem to be drawn towards. But yeah, I mean, there are absolutely patterns. I mean, when someone is taken on board a craft, for example, to a large extent, you can predict what they're going to say because the insides of UFOs and the whole onboard UFO experience follows a pretty standard pattern. People describe being physically examined. They often describe the room as being rounded inside, having indirect lighting, no visible lights, but it's almost always brightly lit. So there are absolutely patterns for sure.
And you spoke about UFOs over prisons. We have here in Brasilia, where I live, here in Brasilia, we had in 1991 a case that the UFO hovered over a federal prison here in Brasilia called Papuda, the prison of Papuda. And the UFO was witnessed by 12 to 15 military policemen in a prison, and
Wow.
also off the radar. Can you tell us some cases in the United States where a UFO hovered or stayed over a prison?
Yeah, there are actually quite a few of them, including one of the most famous prisons in the U.S., Alcatraz, or not Alcatraz. Oh gosh, the name is escaping me. It's in California. I forget the name of it. It'll come to me, but it was actually photographed, which I find fascinating because it's very difficult to catch photographs of a UFO. But I did find prison cases all across the United States, all across the world, actually, in England and Europe, all over the place. And often they're cited by the guards, but sometimes by the prisoners themselves, and hover quite low. I think it's because the ETs are, again, interested in anything that's technological, and prisons are very, I mean, they've got these electrified fences, guards, towers. They're very fortified and secure. I can only imagine what the ETs must think of what's going on here. And I did actually find a few cases. One case, a gentleman called me from Canada. He was actually abducted out of his prison cell and put back in. So, I mean, talk about friends in high places. Yeah, I mean, so it's really interesting, these cases. There was one case in the US on the East Coast where it affected people physically. They could feel the electricity from it. One guy tried to radio into the guard tower and his radio wouldn't work. We hear that quite often. But it's very interesting. There was a case in Arizona where it came right low over the prison, so low, all prisoners saw it, guards saw it. It caused quite a stir in the prison. Probably my favorite case of that kind occurred in Colorado, where a UFO hovered for hours over the Colorado penitentiary, and it caused such a stir, such an alarm, that they called in extra guards, they called in the police. Hundreds of police officers saw it. They ended up contacting the local Air Force base, who scrambled planes after these objects, and that finally chased them off. But yeah, many, many cases of UFOs over prisons.
Well, I hope that not for rescue the prisoners, because we will have any type of any kind of resistance to stop it. You recently published in your YouTube channel, which link I'm gonna put here in the description of our interview in the video. And in this video, talk about the Taylor Foster case. He was abducted and became friend of the aliens, right?
Yes.
Can you tell us about this case, please?
Yes, this very interesting gentleman. He's very kind, very intelligent. As a young boy, he was about 9 or 11 years old, and his mom sent him out to mail a letter. He lived in St. Louis, Missouri, in the city. So this is not a country area. It was lots of houses, lots of people around. And he mailed the letter one evening and was returning home when he saw a large saucer-shaped object overhead, hovering right over an apartment building. It was quite low, and he had never really heard or thought much about UFOs, so he wasn't quite sure what he was looking at. But next thing he knows, it strikes him with a beam of light, and he experienced missing time, amnesia. Some time passed, and he ran home, and his mom was very concerned because it took him over an hour to mail a letter. It should have taken him 5 minutes. And what was very interesting about this is that this changed his life. He says after this experience, he felt much more intelligent, much more aware, almost spiritually enlightened. He had been a very poor student, and following this incident, his intelligence increased, and he moved to the top of the class and remained there all the way through college. And he did remember actually what happened during this missing time. He started to remember being taken on board and visiting with human-looking extraterrestrials. They were tall, slender, blonde hair, wearing black and white jumpsuits, and were very kind. And he had a long philosophical conversation with them and sort of made friends with them. And this started a lifetime of contact. And following this, he had many encounters with what we call the Greys, the short, bald-headed, large, dark eyes, pale skin beings. And sometimes this did involve missing time, and his memories were sort of suppressed. But as time went on, he started to remember more and more and had fully conscious encounters. And they taught him all kinds of things. They taught him how they move through walls, how they're able to travel very quickly and turn at right angles and things like this. And it ended up being he calls them his friends. He's since had hundreds of encounters. They show themselves to him on purpose. He met a girl, a lady, and he told her, if you're going to go out with me, you're going to see UFOs. And she thought he was kidding, but it wasn't long before, sure enough, she became a believer. She had to, because these UFOs kept appearing. It's a very interesting case because he has no fear. Many people have a lot of fear surrounding their encounters, but he does not. He believes they are his friends.
So we have this amazing case, Preston, and why don't the alien give to him or gave to him some I don't know, some device, something that he can prove that he is telling the truth, because you believe him because he studied the case. I don't know him, but you do. I'm sure that everybody gonna doubt about his report, his telling. So why these beings, when they get in touch, in contact with human beings, they don't give some, well, okay, hey, have this to prove
Yeah.
that you are on board the UFO, or you're my friend. Why?
Yeah, that's quite frustrating. And it's hard to understand because people have asked, well, why didn't he photograph them? And people have tried to photograph them, and usually it doesn't work. They will turn off your camera or drain the power. And he doesn't feel the need to prove this to anybody. He's a very quiet, reserved, even shy gentleman. So I don't think that was his goal. But I certainly do wonder about it. And I've looked into this because this is generally the rule. They do not give you physical evidence, but occasionally they do. And in fact, in my Not From Here series of books, which you mentioned, I did a chapter on alien gifts, because people have gotten, bars of metal or crystals or even technological instruments in a few cases. It's very rare. It's much more common to perhaps capture a really good photo. The UFO will pose for a person and allow them to photograph them. But there is a case in South Carolina involving a gentleman by the name of William Herman, who they gave him this bar of sort of metal. It had little stars imprinted on it, the word man, and said, "This is our gift to you for being a contact with us." This metal was analyzed and proved to be normal sort of terrestrial lead. But he also was able to get all kinds of really clear photographs. And I know another case in Texas, same exact thing. The ETs said, "This will be our gift to you," and gave this gentleman a piece of metal. Unfortunately, as soon as he got it, the so-called men in black showed up and took it. But there are many cases like this. One gentleman was given a telescope-type device that was stolen immediately by government people. There were another case in somewhere in South America, I think it was Ecuador, around there. 2 young kids were taken on board a UFO, and they traded their flashlight for the ET's flashlight. And they were running home to go tell people when government agents showed up and took it. That's what usually happens in these cases. That happened in another case in the US, where ETs took a whole family on board and gave one of them this green crystal sort of healing stone. And they had it in their house for a few days, but government agents showed up, cleared out the house, and found it and took it. So it does happen, but it's very rare. And when someone gets their hands on physical evidence, as often as not, government agents or the so-called men in black will show up and take it. So that's something to be aware of if you ever do get your hands on something like this. I am in contact with a lady in Florida, I should mention, who was able to secure some alien artifacts. She has not made them public, but they absolutely, she was able to get some biological material, stones and seeds and things like this.
Well, there is evidence, but not with us. always, always there's evidence, but not with us. Well, we are talking about extraterrestrial contact with these beings. So I found in your books some very interesting cases that I would like you to share with us. One is a Navy corpsman, a Navy, was invited aboard a UFO, and there he met a 15-foot tall, friendly praying mantis type.
Yes.
Weird. Tell us about this case.
Yes, this is one of my favorite cases that I've researched. The gentleman, his name is Kevin Kamen, and he was in the Navy as a medic, a corpsman, a really good witness, a trained observer. I've interviewed him many, many times. He's been on the radio. His story has never changed. And it turned out his friend on board the ship, a personnel clerk, was a contactee. And one day his friend says, I'm in contact with ETs, and they're very friendly. They've taken me since I was a little boy. They've taken me on board their craft. I've been to their planet. And Kevin's like, really? If that's true, I'd love to meet your little green friends. And his friend's like, oh, okay, I'll see if I can arrange it. And mind you, this is while they're on the Navy ship. This is back in the early 80s. And a few days later, his friend comes back and says, well, I went to your house, I saw your house, and described his house in detail, which was really surprising to Kevin. And then said, yeah, my ET friends said that they've agreed to give you a visit and that they will come very shortly. And it was like the next day, the guy comes into the cabin and says, okay, they're here, go up on deck and you will see this UFO. And Kevin thought his friend was kidding, but goes up on deck. This was during his lunch hour. It was just a short walk to the deck. This is a 600-foot Navy ship filled with people. And he gets on deck. There's many people on deck. And there's this gigantic UFO hovering alongside the ship. No one seems to notice it. He says, according to Kevin, it was quite large, probably 3 times the size of the Navy ship itself. And beautiful, covered with colored lights. And the first thing he does is, of course, is try to get another witness, and runs over to the cook there and grabs him by the shoulders and starts shaking him, and can't get his attention. The next thing Kevin realizes is he's not on the Navy ship anymore. He is on the craft itself, looking down at the Navy ship in the water, which is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And he realized he's been taken on board. This is a pretty complicated case. I mean, we could spend an hour talking about just this case. But in a nutshell, this UFO started taking him on a journey. Took him to his hometown in Kankakee, Illinois. Showed him where his father worked at a bank. He could see through the walls into the bank building, saw his father there. Could see his mother where she taught school at a church. It was daytime there, so it appeared as if they had time traveled, because it was daytime where he was in the Mediterranean. So that was very unusual. Took him to his house, and he saw himself as a kid. His grandmother was still alive. She had since passed away. So definitely there was some time travel aspect to all of this. Next thing he knows, they're flying over a cratered area. And he's thinking, is this a bomb zone? Is this the desert? And suddenly they come over the horizon and he can see Earth in the background. It's a tiny little ball. And he realizes it's the moon. They are hovering over the moon itself. And this is when he started speaking with these ETs. At this point, he hadn't turned around yet. He was too afraid. He was just kind of looking out through the wall, through an opening. And the ETs started talking to him. And they told him where they lived, what they ate, that they know all the languages on our planet, that they've been trading with the main governments on our planet, all kinds of information. They told him Roswell, the UFO crash, was real. They told him that since we had started exploding nuclear weapons, it caused a countdown clock and that all these disasters would happen. This is a very common theme. And they explained that our planet was going to be struck by massive hurricanes, earthquakes, tornadoes, landslides, all kinds of disasters. They actually showed him these disasters. It was as if he was looking outside a window, watching them occur. And so it was a very long, complicated case. Finally, he asked them, "What do you look like?" And they said, "Well, we're not little and we're not green. And our appearance, some people might find frightening." And so he finally just turns around and looks at them and got a real shock. There was 3 of them. They were sitting on white, sort of stone-looking chairs, and they were praying mantis, which I've certainly heard many times. People often describe praying mantis-type figures, but they're usually about 8 to 9 feet tall. Well, one of these figures stood up and walked over next to Kevin, and Kevin estimates that this figure was about 15 feet tall. I asked him, "Are you sure about that?" He's like, "Yeah, listen, I'm 6 feet tall. It was more than twice my height." And this being asked him, "Would you like to go to our planet?" And Kevin said, "No, please take me home." And that's what they did. Next thing he knows, he's waking up back on the Navy ship. And he was very frightened and quite upset by this whole encounter because he was not expecting it, even though he had actually asked to be taken on board and was invited and received what he asked for. It was quite a shock to him.
Yeah, and it's amazing because he was in a Navy ship, and he experienced, and it is just like the 80s. The 80s, when the contactees had his contacts, the aliens show them what is going to happen to the Earth if we proceed with the nuclear weapons and wars. They show the planet is going to be destroyed. I think it's a very common warning of the aliens to us back to the 80s.
Yeah, I hear it many, many times from other people.
It's amazing. For me, it's amazing and very curious, and I cannot explain. But there's another case in your book that makes me, goosebumps. It was a young couple expecting their first baby discovers that the extraterrestrial have taken the baby.
Yes.
It's not good. It's not good.
Yeah, this is quite an alarming case. This is in my book, Wondrous. That occurred in 2000 or let me think for a second. Yeah, I think it was 2006. So not very long ago. And this is part of what I would call the hybrid baby program. And I heard about this from the beginning of my research back in 1986, where a woman will be pregnant and then suddenly she's not pregnant. And then she's taken on board and shown a baby that's perhaps half human, half alien. So what happened in this case is this couple from Canada contacted me because they had a very unusual experience. He had seen UFOs earlier in his life. She had seen what she described as light beings occasionally coming into their bedroom at night. But this was something that they didn't think much about and didn't really fully realize what was happening. At any rate, they became pregnant. It was very good news, and the pregnancy proceeded normally all the way up to about 7 months. And that's when something very unusual happened. They were driving to a friend's house, and they experienced missing time. They became very disoriented, found themselves at a different spot on the road. I don't remember seeing a UFO, but definitely something happened that they couldn't explain, and they didn't know how to categorize it. And it was just a short time later that they were at their home. This is in Canada. And there was an electrical storm over their house, and it was very powerful. It quite frightened them. The husband got up to close the window and could see lightning striking down in their backyard. And it did not look normal because the lightning was coming sideways through their yard. And it was very powerful. So he closed the window and hopped back in bed. And the next thing they know, it's morning. That was very unusual because they had both been awake and their hearts were beating fast. They had a lot of adrenaline pumping through them. So to just fall asleep seemed very strange to them. And when they woke up, they both felt very groggy, tired, almost anesthetized, as if they had had surgery or something. And the wife turned to her husband and said, "Honey, I don't feel pregnant. Is my stomach smaller?" And it was. Her stomach had shrunk in size. And they thought at first, well, maybe, she was doing exercises because the baby was in a breech position. He was in the wrong position to give birth. And they thought maybe the baby had moved into the proper position. But they went to the doctor. They had an appointment set up anyway. So they went to the doctor, moved the appointment up a few days. And the doctor's like, "Well, you're not pregnant. We can't explain this. There must have been a misdiagnosis. We don't know what happened, but you are no longer pregnant." And she absolutely knew she had been pregnant, by the way. I mean, they took blood tests. She felt the baby kicking. They had a midwife. Her belly was, quite large. She was absolutely pregnant, verified. She sent me the doctor reports and photographs. So this was a very well-verified pregnancy. And the baby was just gone, missing. They, of course, began crying and couldn't understand it. Neither could the doctors. Their explanation was it was a misdiagnosis and that she probably was never pregnant. But they knew that she was. They had felt the baby kicking many, many times. So they couldn't explain it. And that's when they started doing research and discovered that this is something that does happen in UFO encounters. It's called the missing fetus syndrome. And I've talked to many other people that this has happened to. Usually happens in maybe 3 months of pregnancy, possibly 4 months. Never had a case at 7.5 months duration. So that's very unusual. Often what will happen is people are taken on board, as I mentioned, and shown the child. In fact, I know cases of people who have a relationship with their baby that was taken, and they meet them regularly all the way up to adulthood. That did not happen in this case, as far as I know. But they were initially quite upset. But following this incident, the wife felt very certain that her child was still alive and in good hands, and she was remarkably okay with it. She was, I don't want to say happy, but she kind of understood, and she felt that this was a very special thing that had happened to them. It was difficult telling their parents. Both their parents were still alive, and everyone had been expecting this child and were quite excited about it. So that was very difficult. But overall, they accepted that this had happened to them.
Cases like that is much more common that we think. In the UFO literature, there's a lot of cases where the woman got pregnant and then the baby just disappear, and then when you study, you discover that she was abducted several times since the childhood and lots of. But in your opinion, why they do that? Why they take the baby? They put the baby there and they take it out to make a hybrid entity being. In your opinion, why they do that?
Yeah, well, we know why, because contactees have been told by the ETs themselves. And I have several cases of this, and certainly I've seen it in the research of other people, such as John Mack or Bud Hopkins and Barbara Lamb and many others. There's a case in my latest book, Wondrous, where a lady asked them flat out, why did you do this? Because she had that happen to her. And they said what they told many other people. Their genetics have been damaged due to space travel and radiation, and they have lost the ability to reproduce. And the Greys are essentially human, but they are genetically damaged. They said that they once looked like us, but their appearance is now different due to genetic manipulation and damage, and that they are trying to reinvigorate their genetics and fix it so that they have the ability to reproduce again by introducing our genetics, which is, I don't want to say identical, but very similar to theirs. So that is really the purpose behind the hybrid alien agenda, that they are just trying to reproduce again and reintroduce emotions, some of which they've also bred out because they were concerned about their own aggressions and emotions and how that was causing problems in their society. In this case I mentioned from this lady, she asked them, are you planning on taking over our planet? And they said, no, we have no interest in, living on your planet. It's far too crowded. You guys are way too emotional for us. There are plenty of other planets out there that we can live on. We have no interest in taking over your planet, which I think is encouraging because this is a concern of some researchers. But this is the story I've heard from many other people. This is the reason behind the hybrid alien agenda. And it's not necessarily a negative thing. And in fact, several contactees feel like they have allowed this or given permission to be a part of this project. So, not everyone feels like this is a positive experience for them. It can be quite traumatic and scary. But the people who move past the fear, often there's a very strong spiritual component to all of this. People are not only given warnings, but often they are healed, physically healed. That's quite common. Healing people is a major ET agenda. And also they're given spiritual teachings or advice. People are taught how to do healings. They are taught how to elevate their psychic abilities so that they might start having out-of-body experiences or past life recall or channeling or precognition. A wide variety of spiritual abilities are woken up in people as a result of their close encounters. So the more I look into this, the more encouraged I am. I don't think ETs are here to hurt us or scare us or take over. The evidence does not support that. In fact, it's the opposite. I think this is good news for us.
Well, you started a question they're gonna make later, but let's start now. The healing. Well, if they want to help us, why don't they heal all our disease? We have the COVID. Why don't they give us the cure for the COVID or the cancer or the AIDS? And why they pick a specific person to heal? Why don't they heal the whole human beings?
Yes, yeah, it's quite frustrating, isn't it? Because millions of people are dying of disease, heart disease, cancer, uh, flu. All of these things are killing millions of people each year. And people are not being healed. The vast majority of people are not being healed. So it's quite curious. I think the ET, I mean, we know that I've documented some 300 cases. So I know that this is a real phenomena. I think it's probably far more widespread than the 300 cases I've been able to locate. And I'm still getting lots of them all the time. So I think it is more common than people realize. But definitely everyone is not being healed. And I think one of the reasons is that the ETs know better than to heal everyone, because that could actually cause us far more problems. We already have problems with overpopulation and the inability to feed ourselves, wars, and lots of social unrest and racism and divisiveness and political problems. If we were given the ability to heal ourselves of all illnesses, it could very likely make things worse for us. So I think that's maybe one of the main reasons that they are not doing that. Also, we can't just have all the answers handed to us. As every parent knows, you can't just do everything for your child. They will not learn. You cannot tie their shoes and feed them all the way up into adulthood. They have to go out, spread their wings, and live on their own. I think that's another reason. ETs are helping us behind the scenes on a limited basis, but it's up to us to solve our own problems. We have to learn to solve our own problems. They cannot do it for us. That will not help us to learn. So I think that's another reason. But I have noticed patterns as to who's being healed and why, because they do heal people all over the world. These cases stretch back more than 100 years. They occur to men and women equally, very young children, elderly people. It's certainly not based on race or religion or politics, political affiliations, or blood type, or anything like that. It seems very random at first, but one pattern I did notice very strongly is if you have a history of contact, if this is something that's been happening to your whole life, you're much more likely to be healed. If it's tracking your family, and we know this phenomena does track families. If you're having encounters, it's very likely your parents had encounters, or your grandparents, or relatives, your children. So if it's within your family, if you have a history of this, you're much, much more likely to be healed. About half of the cases of healings fall under this category. But some people have never had a UFO encounter and they're still healed. And I found a very, very interesting pattern. It took quite some research. But what I found is that the people who are being healed I kept finding social workers. One after another. I'm like, what do you do for a living? And they're like, oh, I'm an animal rights activist. I work for human rights. I'm a social worker. I'm an artist, a musician, an inventor, a police officer, teachers, lots of doctors. And I started to realize that people who are being healed are the people who are doing good work for humanity in some capacity. They are people who are working to enlighten people, teach them, make their lives easier and better. So that is definitely a pattern that I've noticed quite strongly. I always ask now, whenever anyone contacts me that says I've been healed, I'm like, what do you do for a living? One guy told me he was a bus driver. I'm like, oh, huh. And then he says, but my real passion is actually I run a website that's all about spirituality, and I give psychic readings, and I teach people how to move along the pathway towards enlightenment. I interviewed another lady in Norway. She has no history of encounters. ETs came and healed her chronic back pain. She had injured herself quite severely and had chronic back pain, which was interfering with her ability to work. I said, well, what do you do for a living? She says, actually, I'm a retired graphics artist. They love artists, so that didn't surprise me. But she said, my real passion is animal rights. I'm very famous in my country for working on human rights and animal rights. So please don't use my name because I don't want my name connected with UFOs. But I was not at all surprised to hear this because they love social workers. And again, this is another reason why I feel like the ET contact is not a negative thing. If they're helping people who are helping others, that shows a major agenda to help enlighten humanity.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Your perspective, your point of view is quite different for the most part of ufologists, and I like it. It's very interesting because we always saw the bad side. Well, you were abducted, you're screwed. It's amazing your point of view. I like it very much.
Yeah, I think part of the reason is we're very fear-based. We're taught to fear. The media itself is very fear-based. So I think we have to step back and look at what's happening objectively. Like, is this bad for us? Yeah, I do know people have negative encounters. I am not going to deny that. There are people who have been medically hurt. There are people who have been traumatized. People who have PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, nightmares. It can be very scary. But what I don't see is accounts of outright sadism or torture. They're not trying to scare people. The first things that ETs will say, and this is almost the rule, is don't be afraid. We won't hurt you. And that's usually demonstrably true. The scariest thing is being physically examined. A lot of people don't like that. I understand. I mean, people don't even like going to the doctor anyway. It's not pleasant to be, operated on or probed and so forth, especially by beings that look quite different from us. But often that's the worst part I hear. And this is when they're actually doing healings. And if someone has a very strong fear reaction, they will suppress your memories. They'll paralyze you. And this can cause people to conclude that this is bad, this is evil. And often that's all they're left with is just memories of being physically examined. But people who don't have a strong fear reaction are given freedom of movement. They are allowed to remember everything. They're taken to the engine room and shown how the craft works. They're taken to the control room and told how to fly the craft, or even allowed to fly the craft. That's not unusual. In every book I've written where people have close encounters, that turns up in at least a quarter of the cases. So again, I think if you look at this objectively and throw away your belief systems about what we think ETs are doing and just look at what they are actually doing, you'll see that this is not as negative an experience as it's often portrayed in the media.
Great. Let's change subject. Let's talk about the schoolyard UFO encounters. You wrote a book with more than 100 cases, included one in Brazil. And tell us a little about some cases and why do they show themselves to the student and teachers? They have some kind of plan to prepare these kids to the future.
Yeah, I think that's exactly why. I was quite surprised to hear that schoolyard and UFO encounters is a part of the ET agenda. I mean, I had been researching UFOs for some 30 years before I ran across this. There are a few very famous cases. There's one in Rua, Zimbabwe at Ariel Elementary School, where UFOs landed next to the school. ETs came out and gave the kids messages about the environment. Don't chop down your forests, stop polluting, you've become too technological, things along these lines. A lot of kids on that playground saw this happen. So they're like 50, 60, 70 kids saw this. I thought, wow, that's an amazing case. And I thought it was unique. But then I remembered there was a case just like that in Florida, at Opelika, Florida, where UFOs landed next to an elementary school, and some 200 kids saw this. And then I remembered, well, there's also that case in Australia at Westall High School. Some 300 kids saw UFOs land next to the school. I'm like, wow, they're landing next to the schools. Is this a thing? And I started looking more deeply into it. There was another very famous case in Wales at Broadhaven Elementary School. Another very famous case at Hillsdale College in Michigan, where UFOs landed next to the school. So I started really researching this, and I found over 100 cases, reaching back to about 1950. I found one earlier case, but really it started in 1950. And these are not coincidental sightings. These are much different than your average sighting, which is, an anonymous light at night, which darts by and moves off. In these cases, the UFOs come during the day. They target the schools directly. They will appear on the horizon or straight up and come right for the school and stop over the school. Often during lunchtime or recess when the kids are outside, and very low, usually 300 feet, 200 feet, or landing. They land in about 30% of the cases. So these are not average encounters by any means. They stay for quite some time, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, an hour, or longer, sometimes over a period of days. So it became very clear to me quite quickly what's happening here. They are showing themselves on purpose. Another very interesting pattern I found was over half of the cases involved elementary schools, primary schools, meaning, kids, the youngest of our children. Children are very, very impressionable at that age, before they're even teenagers. And in most of these cases, they've never even heard the term UFO or alien or extraterrestrial. So they don't have any fear. They have no judgment. They don't discriminate. But this is something they remember for the rest of their lives. So that, I think, is what's going on here. The ETs are showing themselves intentionally, on purpose, and sort of introducing themselves to children to let them know that we are not alone in the universe, that UFOs are real, that extraterrestrials are visiting our planet. And it's like my question would be like, why? Why do they want kids to know? I think it's because at some point, the ETs are going to show themselves to all of humanity. We're going to have open official contact, and they want to do it in a way that won't upset the entire world. And so by introducing themselves to children, they sort of get children to believe in UFOs, and the younger it's worked really well. If you talk to younger children in the younger generations, there's pretty much a universal belief in UFOs. And their agenda has been very effective. So I think that's what they're doing. They're trying to get us used to their presence, adapt us to that, acclimatize ourselves to their presence, let us know they're real so that when they do show themselves, it won't upset the world and people won't go crazy. So I think that's the whole agenda behind these schoolyard UFO encounters.
Yeah, and this kid's life changed, for sure. They changed their perspective. I think they are not selfish to think, well, we are the only race in the universe. Of course not. They saw something different. And when I ask to my kids if they believe that we have been visited by aliens from other planet, they ask me back, we are not? Of course we are. So they are much more prepared than me, than you, than average people.
Yeah. When I found out
Because
UFOs were real, I was so shocked. I had no idea. It was quite difficult. I was not happy.
yeah,
I think that's exactly why. And yeah, many of these kids do remember it for the rest of their lives. Some become UFO researchers. Some talk about it daily, think about it daily. Some go on the radio. They become teachers. They start getting really interested in mathematics and astronomy. It affects them deeply.
That's great, and I hope they will replace us as ufologists, of course. And I hope I think they're gonna be much better than us, of course. I hope. I hope. You also talk about some aspects little explored in ufology, such as the smell of the UFOs and alien drinks. It's not alien drinks, not you can take a Coke and put some Sprite on it and put some vodka. This is not alien drink. So what do UFO smells like, and what the other reveal about the phenomenon? And tell us about the alien drinks as well.
Yeah, UFO smells was something I really wanted to research because I had run across a lady who says she was taken on board and she smelled what smelled like beans and hot dogs. I'm like, you're kidding. I thought she was joking. She says, no, honestly, it smelled, like organic odors. Oh, wow, that's interesting. Because I remember Whitley Strieber, a very well-known contactee, had described being taken on board, and he said it smelled like a locker room or a cheesy smell. He said that the ETs themselves smelled almost like cinnamon. And so I started doing some research, and I found that there was almost no research into this at all. And I started collecting cases in which people have smelled odors during a UFO encounter. And I found some very interesting things. These smells fall into two categories. One is sort of an ozone-like odor or an electrical odor, chemical odor, metallic odor, which to me shows that these UFOs are physically real, because when someone is smelling something, they're actually breathing in physical molecules and sensing them. So that proves that these are machines, that this is not a psychological phenomena. This is something that's physically real and very advanced technology. And the other category of odors is organic. Over and over again, people will describe the interior of UFOs in particular as having organic odors, sometimes unpleasant, like a cheesy smell comes up quite a bit, a sulfur type smell. But sometimes people who have smelled ETs directly describe them as cinnamon or woodsy or a kind of a damp sort of organic odor. And that I found very interesting, because that, again, has something to say about the nature of extraterrestrials, their origins. They are biological beings like us. If people are smelling organic odors, that shows that these are organic living beings. And again, shows that this is not a psychological phenomena, as some skeptics and even some researchers have tried to put forth. No, this is absolutely physically real. And the fact that people are smelling organic odors shows that what we're dealing with are extraterrestrials, people like us from other planets. And I think that's a very important fact, because there are different theories to explain the UFO phenomena. Some people talk about time travelers. I'm like, well, yeah, they can time travel, but that doesn't, preclude them from being extraterrestrial. Others say, well, they're interdimensional. I'm like, well, yeah, perhaps they can travel interdimensionally, but so can we. Everything in the universe stretches out into other dimensions. That's just sort of the nature of the universe. I don't think that explains their origins or who they are. I think the extraterrestrial theory is the theory that best fits the evidence. So that's why I thought the research into odors was so important. But yeah, I'm glad you brought up alien drinks too, because that's very strange. And again, I couldn't find a whole lot of research into that at all, because it's quite common. People are given stuff to drink or even eat aboard UFOs. And sometimes this does seem to be simple nourishment. People will be given perhaps juice or wafers or something to eat. And sometimes it's like a fruit juice. It tastes good, but more often than not, it's an unpleasant sort of bitter liquid. And I'm not exactly sure what's going on here. Some people do feel like it's medicine and they are being healed. And that does turn up in quite a few of the healing cases. People are given liquids to drink. But in some cases, no. There was a case in England where an entire family was taken on board and they were all given this bitter sort of milky liquid to drink right before they left the craft, right at the end of their experience. And the only person who wasn't given anything to drink was the youngest child. She was about 4 or 5 years old. And she was the only one who remembered the experience consciously. They all had to go under hypnosis. So it's pretty clear that in that case, the purpose of the liquid was to make them forget. And I think that does turn up in a few other cases. So that could be the purpose behind some of this. Some of it might be medicinal, as we would think of it. It's really hard to say, but it's a very interesting phenomenon because it turns up quite a bit, these alien drinks.
Antonio Villas-Boas' abduction, Antonio Villas-Boas were put in a room with a very bad smell. He also threw up because of that smell. Present, to finish our interview, are we prepared for the final contact?
Oh gosh, I hope so. I feel like we're real close. There's always going to be a segment of the population here on Earth which are going to have a difficult time. People who are profoundly skeptical and refuse to look at the evidence are going to get quite a shock. Because I think any objective, intelligent person who is willing to examine the evidence can only come away convinced. I mean, it's not just eyewitness testimonies. We have lots of film evidence, lots of landing trace cases, lots of medical evidence, healings and injuries. We have implant removal evidence. The evidence is there. But some skeptics have refused to examine it. And people who are profoundly religious or who have no room for ETs in their belief system are going to have a difficult time. But polls show that most people believe in UFOs now. And it is going into the mainstream. Governments across the world are beginning to disclose and talk about this. It's getting on the daily news. It's the second most popular subject on the internet. There are many, many television shows about UFOs. This is a subject the UFOs are not going to go away. They are just moving closer and closer. Contact is escalating. It's not decreasing. It's happening more and more. So it will happen. Are we ready now? I think we're, very close. It might upset, certain aspects of society. It's gonna definitely change things with science and religion and business, and all aspects of society are going to have to adjust. But I think it probably will happen within this generation. And it could happen very soon. I know I'm ready. And I hope it does happen soon because I think it's important. The ETs are very concerned about us destroying ourselves. This is one of their main agendas, is to sort of save us from destroying our own planet. So it might come down to that if reaches the point of no return, that we're going to have an existential crisis and a large loss of life due to the way we're treating ourselves and our planet. They might just come down and show themselves to everyone. Yeah, I think we're right there. We're so close. If we're not ready yet, we're close.
Well, I hope to be alive to be witness of this final contact. Well, Preston, I would like to thank you very much for being here with us in my YouTube channel. I will leave all the links to buy your books, just to the Brazilian audience know about yourself, about your research, because it's a very, very good research. You have more than 22 books, 22 only about ufology with several aspects of ufology. And I never read another author writing about UFOs over drive-ins or smell and alien drinks. So I think you are doing a very good work. Thank you very much for being here, my friend.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate you having me on the show. It's an honor and a delight. I really enjoyed speaking with you, so thank you.
Thank you, my friend.